Now to new fallout in the explosive case rocking the New York City Police Department. There's growing outrage about a suspect who died in custody after the arresting officer put his arm, as you can see, around his neck. A preliminary autopsy report could be out later today, and ABC's Ron Claiborne is here, has been staying on top of this for us. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning to you, Robin. And there are now 2 investigations into that incident that was captured on several videos. Police Internal Affairs and prosecutors both looking into what happened. But even before those are complete, already 1 police officer has had his badge and shield taken, and now 4 paramedics have also been put on modified duty. The story just keeps heating up. This is the video that NYPD and prosecutors are poring over, trying to determine whether police on New York's Staten Island used excessive force to arrest 43-year-old Eric Garner for allegedly selling illegal cigarettes. Watch as one officer appears to have his arm wrapped around Garner's neck. Once Garner is down on the ground, more officers piling on, his face pressed to the pavement. Finally, officers subdue a struggling Garner.
They gave this man a seizure.
Garner, a father of 6, died about an hour later at a hospital, according to police.
They just snatched my heart right out my chest, like I'm an empty shell right now. But I gotta stay strong for my kids.
As investigators look into whether force contributed to his death, the racially charged incident sparking protests over the weekend.
An unarmed man was subjected to a chokehold, and the result is he is no longer with us.
Words of anger, scenes of anguish. The NYPD placing Officer Daniel Pantaleo, an 8-year veteran seen in the video with his forearm around Garner's neck, on modified desk duty, his badge and gun taken away.
EMS, come on, we need to help.
And now 4 EMS workers who responded to the scene after Garner collapsed are also on modified duty. Investigators tell us they will be focusing on whether Garner was placed in a chokehold, which is banned by New York City police guidelines.
A chokehold restraint is meant to suffocate the air out of an individual. This hold was more of the lines of a submission restraint.
And the police union is saying that the videos do not tell the whole story, that police sometimes have to use force to arrest someone. And in their words, out of context, necessary force can be misinterpreted as excessive. The key here could be what the autopsy shows and whether that use of force played a role in Garner's death. Those results expected as soon as later today.
Yes, but the videos are extremely helpful for everyone involved to be able to determine what happened. And as you said, the New York Police Department, they're not allowed to use that type of hold, but they're saying it wasn't technically that type of hold? Well,
the police union is saying it was a restraining maneuver as opposed to a chokehold which cuts off breathing. So the autopsy here will be very important in determining whether he was killed under those circumstances or that led to his death.
One thing that is clear, you could hear him say, "I can't breathe."
He said it 4 or 5 times,
all right,
clearly.
Thank you, Ron.
J'espère que Costa aura au moins cette volonté.
I hope that Costa will at least financially compensate the victims with the same generosity and involvement they have put into this technical feat. Hopefully they will have the generosity to do that for the victims who have been left behind.
De le faire avec leurs victimes qui restent sur le carreau.
There's no need for the memory of the boat to stay there. No, we're the ones who will keep it in our memories. The boat is a solid thing. We're not that solid. The ship will be gone tomorrow, end of the story. But in reality, for us, it's not over.
I have watched the train and the wagons, and I think the storage of the bodies is good of quality. Onze indruk is dat gezien de omstandigheden waaronder dit allemaal is gebeurd.
Considering the circumstances, we are relatively satisfied with how it was done. I am talking in particular about how the bodies were preserved. We think this is a good starting point for the identification process.
Een heel goed uitgangspunt is voor het verdere identificatieproces. Dat heeft mijn hoogst.
This is my top priority, and it should be done as soon as possible. You can hear the engine cooling systems. They are struggling. The temperatures are rising, which speeds up decomposition, which works against the identification process.
Four floors destroyed without warning. Instead, we found a crater. We urge Arab countries to help us and save us from the Israeli occupation.
We heard the sound of heavy shelling and we left home to come see what happened. But there was no house left. 27 dead.
The war of 1948 was not as difficult as this. We were afraid to leave the house because of the drones. We cannot go to work or run errands.
President Obama invited 28-year-old Ryan Pitts of Nashua, New Hampshire, to the White House today so he could present the former Army Staff Sergeant with the nation's highest military award, the Medal of Honor. Pitts defended a key observation post during one of the bloodiest battles of the Afghan War, and he told his story to David Martin.
All right, here we are, FDOP'd.
American soldiers digging in for what would prove to be their last stand. 9 of these men were killed when the enemy attacked their makeshift base in the Afghan village of Wanat in July 2008.
Nice shot,
It was the most intense fight I had ever been in. It seemed like fire was coming from everywhere.
Sergeant Ryan Pitts was wounded in the opening fusillade.
How badly are you bleeding? My biggest concern was a wound in my inner thigh on my right leg. So then I crawled to the southern fighting position and Bogar put a tourniquet on my leg.
Jason Bogar, who was killed a short time later, kept Pitts from bleeding to death. But the situation, described by an Apache helicopter pilot, was desperate.
I think they're pinned down good, bro. I don't think they want to lift their head.
As shown in this Army recreation, Pitts was manning an observation post above the main base at Wanat. The enemy was so close he had to let his grenades cook off before he threw them.
So that the enemy couldn't pick it up and throw it back because it was so close. I didn't want to give him a chance to pick it up.
You'd activate the grenade and then count to 3 or 4?
Yeah.
And then lob it. What happens if you get a short fuse?
It would detonate in my hand.
When Pitts ran low on grenades, he fought on with a machine gun.
He's gonna die.
Suddenly, there was an awful silence all around him.
I thought everybody was dead. I thought I was the only one there.
And you were.
I was.
You're all alone. You're wounded. And the enemy's how close?
Close enough that they could hear him when I was talking on the radio.
4 soldiers rushed to his aid, but they were all cut down. One of them, Israel Garcia, was mortally wounded.
I just held his hand and we talked for a little bit. He wanted me to tell his mom and wife that he loved him.
The Apaches laid down fire within 10 meters, about 30 feet of Pitts.
10 meters. So that's got to be kidding me.
And finally beat the enemy back. But you can see American dead lying on the ground.
9 guys died so the rest of us could come home. And valor was everywhere. Everybody was fighting as hard as they could. And I don't think anybody, no man fought harder than any other.
And the families of all 9 were there today for Ryan Pitts. David Martin, CBS News, Washington.
U.S. intelligence says it has circumstantial evidence that ties Russia to the missile that was used. Our David Martin tells us that analysts are going through satellite photos trying to find the missile system crossing from Russia into Ukraine. The Ukrainian government released this video in which it claims the system, -1 missile, crossed into Russia shortly after the plane went down. Today, President Obama said this about the pro-Russian rebels in eastern Ukraine who occupy the crash site.
They've repeatedly prevented international investigators from gaining full access to the wreckage. As investigators approached, they fired their weapons into the air, The separatists are removing evidence from the crash site, all of which begs the question, what exactly are they trying to hide?
Nothing, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who said today the West is using this tragedy to achieve selfish political objectives. Clarissa Ward is outside the Kremlin in Moscow tonight. Clarissa, what is Putin's strategy?
Well, Scott, clearly Putin is trying to portray the West as hysterical, irrational actors and cast himself as the voice of reason in this crisis. But what he's really doing by constantly repeating that we need to wait and see what the results are of the investigation, he's essentially refusing having to answer any of the growing number of allegations of Russian complicity in this tragedy. That is not a sustainable strategy, and it remains to be seen how Russia is going to deal with this going forward.
Clarissa Ward in Moscow for us tonight. Thank you, Clarissa. We have just learned that Ukrainian rebels have turned over to investigators the flight data recorders of the Malaysian Flight 17, which was shot down Thursday over eastern Ukraine. It has been 4 agonizing days for the families who lost loved ones on Flight 17. They pleaded for the return of the remains of their loved ones. Today, the pro-Russian rebels who control the area of eastern Ukraine where the plane was shot down sent them home in rail cars. 282 of the 298 victims have been recovered so far. The UN Security Council, including Russia, demanded that the rebels now allow investigators safe and unrestricted access to the crash site. We have a team of CBS News correspondents covering this story, and we'll begin tonight with Mark Phillips in Ukraine.
They died in a place they never intended to be, and now most of the victims of Malaysia Air Flight 17 finally began the journey home. The train of refrigerated rail cars where the bodies had been stored became a rolling morgue. It crawled slowly out of the rebel-controlled town of Torres near the crash site. A deal had been worked out to take the victims into Ukrainian government territory, to the city of Kharkiv, from where they were due to be flown to Holland for identification. Dutch forensic experts had viewed the bodies earlier in the day, under a tight escort of rebel guards. Days of living exposed in the summer sun had done its work. Still, Dutch investigator Peter van Villet said he was satisfied with the condition of the bodies.
I have watched the train and the wagons, and I think the storage of the bodies is good of quality.
At the crash site itself, bodies were still being discovered, and Van Villet became the first foreign investigator to get a look, if only a brief one, at the wreckage. An international team of aviation experts that's been assembled has yet to arrive. Security in this war zone is still a concern, as is the security of the passengers' belongings. We saw emergency workers going through personal property. It's clear there's been tampering with materials on the site. If there's ever going to be hard evidence of what brought this plane down, it'll be found here among the wreckage. It's one thing to say that a SAM missile was fired at this plane. It's quite another to find bits of it or some evidence of an explosion. And right now, nobody's looking. As part of the deal to release the bodies, the plane's black box data recorders were also supposed to be handed over to Malaysian representatives. In the end, the handover was repeatedly delayed, but finally, Scott, the black boxes are back in Malaysian hands.
World outrage grew all weekend long as the victims lay in the sunflower fields and wheat fields near the Russian border. Liz Palmer is with the families in Amsterdam.
Mourners are still coming to pay their respects at a makeshift memorial just yards from where the passengers boarded the doomed plane. But for the families of the victims, condolences are not nearly enough.
I want to arrange their funeral. I can't. I don't know where they are. I don't know. I want them back. I want my children back.
Oh my God.
They have to come back.
Give the bodies back.
Mr. Putin, send my children home. Send them home.
Today at last, some of the bodies are finally on the way. And public concern has now shifted to the crash site that's been contaminated and looted.
That's why many Dutch people don't believe they will ever get the full truth about what brought down Malaysia Flight 17. But they do think their government should push for a thorough investigation anyway.
If only to make a political point.
It's now time to show Mr. Putin that he's gone too far, much too far.
The Dutch government has demanded total access for investigators, or else it will enforce sanctions against Russia.
Flight MH17 was
a threat echoed by British Prime Minister David Cameron, speaking on behalf of the French and German leaders too.
Russia needs to know that action will follow if there isn't a radical change in the way they behave.
The European leaders are talking tough, Scott, but there's a lot of resistance to really tough sanctions. They'd not only threaten billions of dollars worth of trade with Russia, but let's not forget, it's Russian oil and gas that literally keeps the lights on in large parts of Europe.
Liz Palmer at the airport where the flight began. Liz, thanks very much.
As a result of its operations, Israel has already done significant damage to Hamas's terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. I've also said, however, that we have serious concerns about the rising number of Palestinian civilian deaths and the loss of Israeli lives. And that is why it now has to be our focus and the focus of the international community to bring about a ceasefire that ends the fighting and that can stop the deaths of innocent civilians, both in Gaza and in Israel. So Secretary Kerry will meet with allies and partners. I've instructed him to push for an immediate cessation of hostilities based on a return to the November 2012 ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas in Gaza.
Mr. Obama, Mr. Abbott. Reporter from the ABC.
You cannot but oppose it in your heart, but this we should follow in the lead of the 4-year-old who clearly has a...
Rabia işaretiyle yumruklarıyla selamlıyorlar. Because this was so strange, but it's because we are Jews. We come out here to condemn what is happening now in Gaza.
There's been a surge of illegal immigrants, many of them children, in recent months, and as Anna Werner reports, some landowners there have had enough.
Your family's been here, what, 175 years?
Yeah, close to it.
Few Texans are as eager to welcome the National Guard as Lorenzo Anzaldúa. His family's land has become a highway for illegal immigrants, such as these women with children who came across the Rio Grande River just a mile or so away 3 weeks ago.
And it's like a funnel, and they all get on the border, or in our land, American soil, and they take 3 or 4 routes, but they all diverge into one, and that's right behind me, that road.
Many wind up in nearby McAllen, Texas. 76% of the illegal immigrants in this recent surge have come through the Rio Grande Valley region. Volunteers have offered help to the immigrants at a Catholic charity shelter downtown. Lazaro Fernandez Jr.'s fabric company is just 2 blocks away.
I'm frustrated because we should have never gotten to that point in that situation, and our government has put us in that situation, and that is wrong.
Officials in McAllen want Washington to reimburse the city for the $700,000 it expects to spend this year to deal with the latest surge of illegal immigrants. That includes transportation and security costs.
We are being invaded, and the quicker the politicians realize that it's an invasion, the quicker they'll close the border.
Anzaldúa hopes the arrival of the Guard is the first step in that direction.
It's not much of a castle, but for now, the local town playground will have to do for Princess Emily and her brother, Prince Caleb. Emily's dad, now technically King Jeremiah, recently claimed one of the few unassigned pieces of land in the world on behalf of his daughter.
With a child, you definitely don't want to ever tell them they can't be something that they desire to be, and at age 6, her frame of reference for the world was to be a princess, and so I told her that she could be.
Most dads would have left it at that. But Jeremiah did some research and found that territory known as Bir Tawil between Egypt and Sudan was unclaimed by either country. He decided to go there, and earlier this year he planted a flag designed by him and his children. He reckons this gives him a better claim than anyone else.
Recently, as the last 5 or 6 years, Russia went to the North Pole area and, using a submarine, planted a flag on the seafloor to represent their territorial claims for energy rights there. So the process of planting a flag is sort of the defined method of doing that.
Jeremiah seems deadly serious about his plans for the territory. He's hired office space in Washington, D.C. to act as an embassy, and says he fully expects Egypt and Sudan to be in touch to discuss official recognition just as soon as Ramadan's over. His daughter Emily is no less ambitious.
We're going to help kids in Africa that don't have food, and we're going to build a garden as big as our land.
Holding royal court at home, Emily explains her new nation's flag.
The star on the top is my mom, and the 3 stars on the bottom are me and my brothers, and the crown represents my dad.
But despite Emily's regal appearance, it might not come as a surprise to learn that experts in international law are less optimistic about the chances of the new nation of North Sudan.
At a basic level, he has to be correct in asserting that this is unclaimed land. That's not obvious to me that he's correct. Beyond that, he has to establish effective occupation of this land beyond simply planting a flag or showing up and taking a selfie.
There might at least be some consolation for Emily, though.
Well, her claim to be a princess, I think, is unassailable. I think any little girl who declares herself to be a princess is such, and that's strictly speaking as a matter of international law.
For now, then, it looks like Emily will remain a princess in exile. But at least that'll give her more time to work on her royal wave.
Tonight, fire crews in Washington state are getting some help from the weather. A giant wildfire has destroyed homes and burned hundreds of square miles, but lighter winds and cooler temperatures could help calm the flames. Right now, wildfires are burning in 6 states. Haley Gunther of our Spokane affiliate KREM-TV has more.
The fires burning in the Pacific Northwest have scorched 1,300 square miles. This video was taken over Pateros, Washington. More than 100 homes were lost. Fire commanders expect that number to grow. Fire spokesman Pete Bust.
As long as we have hot, dry, windy weather, we're going to have problems containing the fire. It's hot, dirty, nasty work.
There are now more than 3,500 firefighters trying to get a handle on the wildfires in the state. The arrival of more water-dropping aircraft and calmer winds have allowed crews to beat back flames threatening houses near the town of Libby Creek.
The first thing that came to my mind was survival.
Judy Swank has lived in this valley for 14 years. She says she only had a few minutes to pack up her belongings and escape.
I was pretty sure that there was just no chance my house was going to make it. I just knew it was gone.
Now, Judy Swank learned her house did burn down. Scott, rain forecast for midweek is expected to help those firefighters, but they fear the storms could bring lightning strikes and start new fires.
As I said before, you have international teams already in place prepared to conduct the investigation and recover the remains of those who have been lost. But unfortunately, the Russian-backed separatists who control the area continue to block the investigation. They've repeatedly prevented international investigators from gaining full access to the wreckage. As investigators approached, they fired their weapons into the air. These separatists are removing evidence from the crash site, all of which begs the question, what exactly are they trying to hide? President Putin says that he supports a full and fair investigation. And I appreciate those words, but they have to be supported by actions. The burden now is on Russia to insist that the separatists stop tampering with the evidence, grant investigators who are already on the ground immediate, full, and unimpeded access to the crash site.
If Russia doesn't help?